Hi everyone, Dave back again, and this time I'm building a Rocketarium kit of the Black Brant IV Canadian sounding rocket. This is the first time I've ever tried a Rocketarium kit, so this may be a new experience not only for me, but maybe for some of you as well. But this is a relatively complex kit, so I would call it an intermediate level. There's not a lot of detailing to be done, but it does have some complex pieces. While the Black Brant IV is a two-stage rocket in real life, this is just a single-stage rocket in the kit. So when we open this up, we've got quite a few parts here, but fortunately Rocketarium has put things together into individual packets. So it's got a whole packet right here that's just the second stage, and then another packet in here that is the motor mount, and then another little packet that's basically just small parts. It's got the shock cord and some little tiny parts here that will go into part of the fin assemblies. All right. The fins are made of basswood or basswood. I've never quite understood how you pronounce that. Instead of balsa, although there's some balsa down here in these parts. But what this does is some of these little parts build up the base here, and you notice it's got these little teeth protruding from it. You don't want to sand those off. Those will actually connect to some of these other parts later on. All right. This kit comes with an ejection baffle, so theoretically at least you don't need to use ejection wadding or a Nomex protector with this. This will be the first time I've actually put one of these together as well. Okay, an assortment of body tubes here, and something to watch. The main body tube actually has a second body tube already glued into it. So this is not a separate part that you need to try and separate. It's already ready to go the way it is. Okay, some nice decals here of the water slide variety. And then there are also some vinyl ones here. And these are basically just long stripes, and these will be used for some of the detailing on the rocket. And then finally we have a plastic parachute that's this lovely shade of blue. Okay, and it's already pre-strung with the shroud lines there, so you don't have to do any of that type of work. There's a good chance I'm probably going to replace this with a nylon chute just for durability. At least at first, to make sure that ejection baffle actually even works correctly here. So I know they're supposed to work, I know how they work, but I've never actually tried one, so I'm going to give in to a little bit of caution there. Okay, and then they give you some really detailed instructions. If you've been building Estes kits of late, the Estes kits actually have a minimal of text and lots of illustration. This gives you a lot of both. Okay. So, as we go through here, we'll come back to these. We have fin marking guides here that are pretty typical. And so I'm going to pack all this back together, and we'll start by putting a few of the assemblies together. So I've opened up the motor mount assembly, and it actually has its own instructions. So if you go from the main instructions here, it says find the bag containing the motor mount parts and follow directions. Okay, so this is apparently a standard sub-assembly that Rocketarium makes, and can go into any kit. Some of the parts here are stuck inside, so I'm going to pull those apart. So this is a spacer that's the size of a black powder E engine, so it's 24 millimeter by, what is that, 9 centimeters? And then we'll use that to space properly the engine block here. The centering rings are actually made of plywood, so they'll be nice and strong. We've got a little piece here to knock out. That'll be for probably a shock cord attachment, I'm guessing. Oh, fell out all by itself. And then it's got another ring on here to help hold the clip here in place. Now, I suspect that if you wanted to, you could also put in a screw type retainer, either the plastic ones that Estes makes or some of the fancier aluminum ones like R.E.A.R makes. But I'm going to go ahead and make this with just the engine hook in it for now. The nice thing about this is a fairly simple engine hook. if I wanted to put in a screw type retainer later on, I could probably just cut this off and stick on the screw retainer. Alright, so to our instructions here. Kind of an odd way to do it, but they're actually putting the engine block in here from the aft end. So we need a marking at the forward end here that is 94 millimeters from the aft. So find a ruler here. Okay, so whichever end we end up marking, that'll be the forward end. Okay, so 94 millimeters is going to be right there. Okay, and what they're doing here is actually making it so the engine block is going to be held further in place by the end of the engine hook. Lots of other models tend to put this on the forward side of the engine hook, and this actually gives you a stronger engine mount because now that force is being transferred not only to the engine block but to the hook itself. Okay, so I'm just going to cut a little slot in there that's big enough for the engine hook. Okay, I'm going to pop that in there. Okay, so this should extend out just a little bit here. And the idea is to have enough springiness here so that this can be pulled back to release the engine. Okay, so now looking down inside of this, I'm going to take the engine hook back out for a moment, and I'm going to put a bead of glue all the way around the inside just below where the hook protrudes inside. So for that, I'm going to use a little bit of wood glue here. Does not want to cooperate today. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to use a cotton applicator here to get down inside. I'd like someone to invent a crudless glue bottle here. Alright. So I'm just going to get a nice big blob of glue here. Okay, and again, this is going to go just below the level of the engine hook. And you don't want to get too sloppy with this because you don't want it extending way down inside the tube there. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. Now the instructions actually had you just marking off the engine tube. This is actually going to fit it even better. So now I'm going to stick the engine block in. Okay, and now I'm going to let this come up a little bit. And now I'm going to take the spacer and use that to push in, and it'll now automatically stop when it hits the engine hook there. Okay. Pull that back out. Okay. So there we've got the engine block and the hook right there. And that actually kind of went up a little farther than I expected it would, but that's where we measured it, so that's where it has to be. And I don't see any problem with it, so it's going to go up there. It might slip in a little bit more, but we should be okay there. Alright, I'm just going to leave that there for the moment because it will give me a line to measure against. And so now from the end of this, just remeasuring my slot there. Yep, it's in the right position. Okay, but we need a marking at 6 millimeters. Right there. And another one at 32 millimeters from the aft. Right there. Okay, and then the very forward ring will be just over the engine hook. Okay, so we've got this one, and it's going to go over here. And these are all just dry fitting right now, so it's going to fit right there and hold the engine hook in place on that end. This big gray ring here is going to go up to there, where that mark was, and then this back one will go right there. Okay, now this does not use through the wall fin mounting, so if this is up a little bit, it's actually going to be okay. And so if you wanted to use a screw-on type of a motor retainer, you might need a little bit extra room here. Now I don't have a spare 24 millimeter screw on, or otherwise I would do that, so I'm just going to use what they give me. This piece here is not actually part of the motor mount. This is used when you're flying on a D engine, and so it will fit inside here and make up for the lack of length that we have with the D-sized black powder engines. If you're using a composite engine, you don't need to worry about it because its lip will fit up against this. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and put this together for realses. I'm just going to pop that front one back a little bit. Just put a nice heavy bead of glue around there. Okay, since this will be using anywhere from D to F power engines. So this one's got a slot that has to line up there. Okay, and I'm going to bring this back till I can see my mark there. And once again, go all the way around here, making sure it's straight. And then I'll come in. I don't have quite enough glue on my finger, and get some there. Okay. So now as I look around this, that can be smoothed out a little bit, and I'll do that in a moment here. Everything looks good there, and now what I need to do is just put a fillet of glue on the back side of each one of these. So our next little sub-assembly here is the ejection baffle, and it comes in its own little bag as well. It just has 4 parts here. So we've got the coupler tube, and then 2 baffle plates, and a screw eye. And so what we want to do first is we're just going to screw this. Oops, try this again. Screw this into the baffle plate. Okay, so it goes all the way through. Okay, and what I would suggest is don't go all the way up to the end of the threads there. but you do want to make sure that you've got a good exposure of threads on the other side. And then what we're going to do is back that out again. And then I'm going to take and just thoroughly coat this screw with glue. All the way up its length. Okay, and now I can put it back in again. Okay, so back about that amount. The glue that's on here, I'm just going to smooth a little bit, but otherwise leave it there, and that'll help reinforce it. And then on the back side, I'm going to add just a little bit more glue. Cover up the threads, but also again to reinforce. I've got the cotton to the swaddle around there to reinforce that. So I want a glob on there. You know, the pointiness of the screw is not going to be an issue because this is going to be toward the interior of the baffle. Okay, so I'm just going to set that aside for a moment. And now you just have to glue the two plates into the coupler here. And so these are meant to go just inside and then go in flush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the piece of plastic that these came in, I'm going to set that out for a gluing surface so then I can just push that straight down and get a good flush edge. Now for the other side with the screw eye in it, that's going to be a little more difficult. Okay, what I'll have to do here is I'm just going to coat the inside edge of this right up to the edge with glue. It doesn't need to go deep inside because we've only got about a few millimeters of thickness to deal with here. I'm just going to pop that back on. I'm going to use this and just press this down on the inside. And now I'm going to make a fillet on the inside here. It's going to be really gooey, but that's okay. Okay. And then on the outside, I'm also going to put some glue around here. Now, you do have to be careful. You don't want to get a bunch of glue around here, or maybe get it too thick to go inside the body tube, because this is going to couple two pieces of body tube together as well. You want to have this in really well so that the ejection charge doesn't blow the discs off and have them flying up through your rocket. Okay, again, I'm going to keep it off the outside edge here. Okay, so that's that side. And now I can prep the other side here in part with the excess glue from my finger. Okay, and again, I'm going to go ahead, and this one I won't be able to refill it from the inside, so I'm going to use a nice heavy layer here. Again, I don't need it to go really far inside, but I want enough that it'll push ahead of the wood and then become a fillet. Tension on this. I'm not even trying to make it flush again. I'm just Try to make it bead the glue just a little bit. And I'm just going to check for any gaps. That's getting sloppy there. Okay, I'm trying to fill those in. Okay, that's going to be good enough. And then I'm going to take the back end of my applicator here and just clear any glue from the holes. Okay, and then take my finger and again rub off that outside edge. If you still have some on there when it dries, you can take some very fine sandpaper and just very lightly touch that off. All right, but now I'm going to let this one sit as well. And when we come back, we'll start marking the airframe. We're back and a night has passed, so the structures that we made yesterday are all nicely glued into place. Checking out the fillets here on our motor mount. Everything is dried. Okay, and nice and strong there. Remember we had a little bit of glue that kind of stuck there. That's broken free without any problem. Okay, so the motor mount looks good. We'll put that aside. And then this was our ejection baffle. Alright, that also looks good. All the glue is nicely dried in place. Okay, and we can just test the strength here by pushing and pulling. That looks really good as well. So the next thing we need to do is mark the body tube to put the fins on. And so the last page here of the instructions have tube marking guides. Now some of these are for the lower tube, some for the upper tube, some are for fins, some are for painting. The one we want is this top one here. The back side is just the parts list. So unless you really want to keep a parts list, we can just cut this out. Otherwise you can photocopy it. And we want the large body tube here that has the aft smaller tube slid into it. And this part is going to wrap around here. Okay, so you're going to want to have a little bit of masking tape or Scotch tape handy here. What we're going to do is we need to line up those arrows with the little hatch marks. Just hold that in place. And what we want to do then is slide this up against the body tube like this, because we need to mark both on this part of the body tube and down here. So I'm going to find my pencil. There we go. Okay, so we have an A, B, and a C and a D line. So now we can slide that off. And now the instructions actually don't tell you how to extend these lines, but you can either place this against a door frame or within the door frame. You can use an angled piece of metal, or you can use this guy here, which is a multi-tube line tool that Estes puts out. And so just depending on what size your tube is, you just orient this around till you get one that fits against your tube nicely. Okay. And that looks kind of weird. Let's make sure we get it up there. Okay. So that's okay. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to draw the line here. along the whole length of that aft insert, and then the forward line will bring up to about here. Okay, so that'll be, the idea is to get this to go beyond where the end of the fin will end up. The launch lug line, the instructions say to put 2/3 up the body. So just run that all the way up there. Now my markings here, some of these ended up being a little bit off. It's okay, I'm going to trust the straight edge of this thing more than that paper marking guide. And I'll also check this against another guide here in just a moment. So if I look across that, that looks pretty even. Alright. So we can set that aside now. The fin assembly is going to take a little while. So when we come back here, we'll start assembling the fins, and then they'll have to dry before we can put them onto the body tube. So the instructions have some fairly detailed steps to assembling the fins. So the main body of the fins here are these basswood pieces. And I'm going to go ahead and give them a little bit of sanding. I've got some fine sandpaper here, I believe it's 220 grit. Alright, so if we look at these were laser cut, so they do have the typical kind of charred edges here. And you might want to give those just a brush or two. Now be very careful down here on the root edge. We do not want to sand off these little nubs here. Those are structural. So I'm just going to pull along here. And mainly I just want to get any loose, somewhat charred wood off of there. It can still have that dark color to it. It's not going to hurt anything. So the other parts we need are in this little packet of small parts. And we don't need everything at once. Mainly right now we need all the wood pieces there. So we're going to just take those out. And these are really, really thin, so be careful with them as you handle them. Alright, I think I'll just pull it all out and separate things. Oh, yeah, there's another one. So be careful, that shock cord may actually be hiding little pieces of wood. So put that back in. Alright, and our launch lugs there. Make sure there's nothing inside them. Alright, I'm going to put those aside. So we've got these little tiny pieces here. And the idea okay, they've actually changed things a little bit, because what we have here, in the instructions it's showing that there are notches here on the fin, and those are not on the actual fins here. And as far as I can tell, the notches are actually just sanding guides. So what's going to happen is, in the end, this little piece of wood with the holes in it, that is going to match up here. So the little nubs on our fin should go through the hole, and that should orient so that the back of this is flush with the root edge of the fin. Okay, and then these little angled pieces here are going to go alongside that, like this, on both sides. Excuse me. A little bit of sawdust there. Okay. So that's what the back end of the fin is going to end up looking like. These little front nubs go up here. Now, we're going to have to actually draw in some placement lines. So it says 4/10 of an inch from the tip here. Again, ours don't have the little notches to line up with, so we have to do it the old-fashioned way. Excuse me. Okay, so what we'll do here, I'm going to put these aside and mark my fins. Now, fortunately, I actually do have a ruler here that is marked in 1/10 of an inch. These are not the easiest thing to find. Now the next thing we need to do is actually bevel the edges of these side pieces that go on the fins. Use some very fine sandpaper, and do this gently. Again, these are little teeny pieces of wood here, but we want them beveled only on one side. The other side will lay flat against the fin, and this is just going to make this a bit more streamlined. Okay, so on the little tiny pieces here, we want to bevel the 3 edges that are not the root edge here, so the forward and trailing edges here and the tip edge, and it's not going to take much. And then the same thing with these pieces that go back toward the aft section of the fin. The root edge here should remain square, but then we want to bevel the other edges here, and again only on one side. The back side of this should remain flat and square. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and when we come back we'll put all this stuff together. So I'm starting the sanding here, and I recommend that you really sand these in sets so that you don't end up with the bevels being on the wrong side. So I'm just going through and sanding a complete set of wood pieces here for each fin. So I've got the 2 beveled pieces for the aft end of the fin, and then also the shoe plate here that would go on right there. Alright, so this way I can make sure that everything is aligning and all my bevels are on the right sides. And I still have to put in my forward ones here. I'm going to do those the same way though. So Before I go on, I will go ahead and just make the two for this fin, and then I'm going to set this whole thing aside as a set and then go on and do the next one. There are two pieces in here, and I believe these are standoffs for the launch lugs, so we can just set those aside. Those aren't fin parts. So here I have one whole set of fin parts ready. They've all been sanded, and these little guys in particular, if you got big fingers, they're really hard to do. But fortunately they don't take a lot of sanding. Just a few strokes is enough to bevel those edges. Alright, and then we've got these side pieces. The ends are fairly easy to bevel. It's getting this long edge here. Again, if you got small fingers, these parts are going to be a lot easier. Now, instead of wood glue, I'm going to use white glue for these, mainly because white glue is thinner. Since these are such small parts, I don't want a really thick glue layer. Alright, so first I'm going to do these little teeny guys here. I'm just going to apply a little bit of glue to the back side. And these aren't load bearing. These are, I don't want to say decorative, but from the point of view of the model they are. Okay, and so now I'm going to put this right next to my pencil mark here. So that's where that front edge should be. And then this should all be flush with the base of the fin. So if I take a ruler here and get beyond those tabs, you can use this and to just press that right up against there, and that gives me a nice flush edge. Check it by eye as well. Okay. I'm going to do that on the other side now. Same way. Just a little bit of glue here. My markings got off somehow. Let me check this again. So that one's correct. That one is not. Okay, another advantage of working with white glue is you have a longer working time. Now I'm going to use the back side of this now and make sure that both are lined up. And actually I'm going to go ahead and put this shoe on first, I think, because that will give me an edge that I can work these into so that they're going to be flush in place as well. So for that, I just need to put a little bit of glue on here. Tabs a little bit gluey by sticking in there, and then I'll press that up here. Okay, and now I can put these pieces on. Now that's the wrong one. I need this side over here. So this is going to go here. And I'm just going to put a little film of glue here. Use my fingernail here to get this right up against the shoe, and also right up against the fin. Okay, and then we'll wipe off that excess there. The idea is for this to all kind of blend in and look like one structure. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on this side. This is dry. Put the glue here first. And once again, align this on both ends. Okay, use again my thumb to right up against there. Moved a little bit. That's okay. Just gently guide that back. Okay, so if I were using wood glue for this, it would probably be so tacky by now that I couldn't make any corrections. Alright, I'm just going to press this all down. Like that. And let's set that one aside. Okay, I'm going to do that to the other two fins, and when we come back, they will have dried, and we can go on to do the sanding section. This is going to take a few hours at least for these to dry enough so that we can sand them. My fin structures are assembled here and drying, and this is, as I said before, has to wait before we can sand it. But what if you get something backwards? Okay, so what if you found that you beveled the wrong side of one of these strips here, or you beveled the wrong side for the forward pieces? The easiest thing to do is just flip it over, re-bevel it the way it needs to be, and then when you glue it in, just use a little bit of excess glue to fill in the places that weren't supposed to be beveled. And if that doesn't work right away, then you can also, in the finishing stages, add a little bit of a paste type of wood filler, like this stuff, plastic wood by DAP, or Elmer's makes a similar type of compound as well. And it's one that you can just take your finger and fill in little gaps and things like that, and it sands right off again. Okay, so these are going to have to wait for a while, and when we come back, we'll see what the next steps are in our body tube assemblies. While we're waiting for the fins to dry, we can do a few other assemblies as well. So this is the upper body tube, and this is our ejection baffle. And one of the things we can do is go ahead and assemble this part. We won't assemble the whole thing yet, but we can put this in and have it ready to go. So we need to measure this. Okay, so it's 2.5 inches long. We want to make a mark halfway down. So add 1.25 inches. Which I'll actually need my other side here for. So that's going to put it right there. You just need a small mark. This is going to be the glue line. So when we put this in here, this needs to fit up inside. That's really tight, which is a good thing actually. Alright, that's going to go all the way up to there, and we're going to glue the inside of this. Now one of the things you can do to help make this easier to put in is take your thumbnail and just kind of chamfer the inside edge of this and bend it a little bit outward. And then on the other end, you do the opposite. So you chamfer the outer edge. And this is just going to give just a little teeny fractional cone shape to that. Okay, so now I'm just going to take my wood glue here, clean off the edge, and I'm just going to run a bead of glue on the inside of this. Okay, that's fairly heavy, but it should still be good there. I don't want that running all over the place. Now I'm going to take my finger and that around there. This is going to be a really strong joint. you don't necessarily need to have quite that much glue. In fact, I'm going to take a little bit of that out. Because that might actually start dripping down into places that I don't want it. Alright, so that still leaves a good layer of glue there, and when I push that in, it's going to make a nice fillet on the forward edge. Especially with wood glue, you want to do this in one motion, and that's still really tight. Oh boy. Yep. Okay, so yeah, definitely use a little bit less glue than I did, because these are really tight fitting tubes. All right, now if we look down inside there, can you see that? You might be able to just make out it's made a nice ridge of glue all the way around the top edge of that, and now we can set this aside to let it dry. This is a really nice heavy tube too. Okay, the other things that we can put together right now are the launch lugs, and that's, remember I said we had these two little pieces of wood here that are not part of the fin assembly. These we're going to simply stack together here, so a launch lug will go on top of each one of these. I'm going to sand the edges of these just really briefly. There's a little bit of just loose material there from cutting, and so I'm just going to give each edge a light sanding here to remove that material. Okay, so this part's pretty straightforward. All we need to do is run a bead of glue along this. And I really don't think it makes a whole lot of difference whether you run the glue on the wood strip first or not, or on the launch lug first. The main thing is you want it centered. So the length is going to be easy. These two pieces are the same length. But then when you look at it from the edge, you want to make sure that the launch lug is in the middle of the wood piece. Okay, if we've got excess glue, you can just wipe that down the edge. Because we're going to want a really nice fillet along here anyway. So again, go ahead and check the alignment there. So that one looks pretty good. Set it aside. Well, I just realized I made a mistake. This baffle part should go into the main body tube, not the upper one. The end with the screw eye should be up in here, and then the parachute and everything would be attaching up in here. There's not much I can do about it at this point because that glue would then really tight. There's no way I can pull this back out again. And aside from just throwing the whole kit away and starting over, unless you've got another tube the same size here, you're kind of stuck. So what I'm going to have to do is go through and cut this out, and I won't have a baffle in here anymore. I'll just have to use either wadding or a Nomex chute protector. I tend to use the Nomex ones anyway, so that's not a big deal. But word to the wise, and make sure you watch this whole video so you don't do what I did here. Okay, so normally, if I had done that correctly, then this would get glued in here. Okay, but the shock cord should have been tied here, and this should have gone in this way. Okay, so it also means I'm going to have to come up with a different shock cord mount. Alright, I think I've come up with a solution for what I can do here. I've taken out the screw eye from the baffle plate, and what I'm going to do is replace the elastic shock cord that came with it with 300-pound test Kevlar. Now, it doesn't really need that heavy of Kevlar, because we're not going to experience forces anywhere near 300 pounds in the recovery of this rocket. But this is a thicker line here, and we want the thickness to help absorb the tension that's going to be produced from the ejection. The drawback to Kevlar is it's not elastic, so you need to use more of it. So if I compare this to my elastic shock cord, which appears to be about 1 meter long, I'm going to use 3 times the length. So I'm just going to run that around. Okay, and it doesn't have to be exact, but you do need a lot more Kevlar than you would elastic. I'm going to go ahead and seal the ends of this because the Kevlar tends to fray really easily, and we can do this with some super glue. So for this part we're going to need some just regular super glue, the kind of runny kind. You want to have a tissue or paper towel handy, and then what we're going to do is simply saturate the fibers here at the end with the super glue. So I'm just going to dab some on there and work it in. And what we're going to do is we'll cut off the frayed end here when we're done. So I want to get a little bit below the frayed area. And now I'm just going to take some tissues here and wipe off the excess. That way this will dry very quickly. Try not to get it on your fingers, it will bond instantly. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing here. And once again wipe off the excess. Okay, and this now is very thin, so it's just going to dry within a few minutes here. Once that's dry, what I'm going to do is kind of snake this down through one of the baffle plates here, and then up through the top plate, and then down again. And what we'll end up with then is a loop of Kevlar going around there. And then we'll put a slip knot on the end of this so that by the time we're all done, we'll have a loop that passes through both of the baffle plates. We'll tie it in here, and then this will come up through the middle. Okay, well, I've managed to touch that without gluing my fingers together, so that means it's okay. Perhaps not the best test in the world, but it's going to work. Alright, so I think this will work easier. I have more control if I go this way, but I'll end up quicker to where I want to be this way. We'll try it both ways here and figure it out. So I'm just going to put this down. I missed. But this is why I'm using this heavier cord, is it's stiffer. And the idea here is to line up a hole Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Maybe a little too much caffeine this morning. Alright, let's see which hole I got it through. Ah, good. Okay, so I managed to get it on the opposing holes. Coming it through here. So now as I bring this up, I don't want this knot to ever come undone. And so what I'm going to do here is, instead of making an actual slip knot, I'm first going to make a loop. So I'm just going to tie an eye in here with an overhand fishing knot. Like this. And I'm going to get that knot as nice and flat as I can. And what I'll do, and I'm just going to do this for a test first, just to show what's going to happen, is now I'm going to stick my other end through that loop, pull it through, okay, and so now when I finish pulling on this, it's going to bring this knot across the top baffle, okay, and then that'll hold this one in place. What I'm going to do at the knot is I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on here so that it can't come undone. And then even if this sits a little funny, it's still not going to come out of that tube. Okay, so I think I've managed to save myself and still keep the baffle here. But this is why always double check your instructions, because I missed that part. So it's been about an hour, which has been more than enough time for the glue to dry on my knot. And all we have to do now is just pull on this until it reaches the baffle there. The knot is hanging up down at the bottom there. I think I'm going to bring it back up and bring it through again. That's fine detailing here. And so the nice thing here is that this is going to come up pretty much centered in the middle. And one of the other things that we do have a problem with, especially with Kevlar, is zippering of tubes. So if this comes at an angle across the tube, it might cut down into there. We can actually put a little piece of masking tape at that point, and that helps distribute the pressure a bit. But I think I've managed to save myself here. And in my own defense, prior to building this particular rocket, I've been working on rockets that have payload bays in which you do assemble them like this. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and finish working the knot around in here, and then we will continue building the model. So I'm still waiting for the fins to dry and the rest of the first stage assemblies to finish drying as we put them together. So now I've opened up the second stage assembly packet. It's just got 4 things in it here. It's got a reducing coupler, a nose cone, another body tube, and this is they call a separation casing tube. Okay, so this just goes on here. Okay, and it's the same diameter as the lower body tube, so this is going to provide a stop here. This will go on to the upper body tube, excuse me, the upper part of the lower body tube here. Okay, so I'm just dry fitting everything here. Stuffing all my shock cord back in here. And so that'll just fit on like this. This has got a really unique texture to it. It may have been 3D printed, but it's got an almost Fresnel-like parallel ridges in here. You can hear them as my thumb goes over them. I don't see anything in the instructions about sanding this, so I'm going to leave it. I actually really like that pattern. Okay, and then this part is going to go here, and then finally the nose cone on top. Okay, and this shows everything being glued together. So this gets glued on, this gets glued on. You might want to not glue the nose cone on, in case you want to do something like put a little altimeter on here to find out how far your rocket went. This would be a good place to put it. You just have to make sure you get a little hole in here somewhere. Okay, so you could just friction fit this piece on with a little bit of masking tape if needed. That's up to you. I'm probably going to do it with mine. Okay, so for this now, I'm going to put this back away. Alright, so starting with this little skirt piece, you want to use some relatively thick super glue for this. Alright, I'm going to run a bead of glue around here. I don't want to put it right up against the what do I want to say, conical piece itself. There we go. Just so I have room for that glue to squish around in here. And I'm going to slide this on. And what I'm going to do is, as I'm bringing it up, I'm giving it a twist to help distribute that glue more evenly. And it's still bunching up a lot there. So when it reaches this point here, I'm going to very quickly wipe off that excess. Like that. Alright, so that I don't have globs on the model. And also be careful that you don't glue your fingers to it. Okay. Almost tried to glue my fingers to it there. Okay, now on this piece I'm going to put the glue up inside of it. So I'm going to put it just around the inside. And here it won't be visible when I push this up, so any glue that gets scooted up on the edge there won't make any difference. And again, I am going to turn this as I go in so that we get nice even distribution of the glue. Okay. And then, as I said, I'm just going to let this be friction fit on here. So I'm just going to place that there. And there might be a little bit of flash here on the very tip. And there is this seam here. It looks like it's only got one. Okay, down here on the reducer, it also has a seam right there. Like I said, I really kind of like the texture here, so I may not do much to sand that. I may just leave it the way it is. Okay. Pretty much at this point, after the glue is dry, you can go ahead and paint this part. They do actually recommend that you paint the two stages separately, and it gives you more control over it that way. And so this one now is pretty much done. As I said, unless you want to do something about the seams here on the plastic, a little bit of flash on the top. Set this over while it continues to dry. And at least for that top bit of flash, I'm going to trim that off. Okay, and here, I can experiment down here, I guess. So if I shave that off, it's still pretty distinguishable from the surroundings. So I've got a few days to worry about this until I get ready to paint it. We're ready to sand the fins now, and if we look at the instructions, if you look closely there, they're trying to show a piece of sandpaper going over this junction between the main lower body tube and this inserted tube. And that doesn't really work well. The idea here is to sand down most of this base shoe plate here to make it the same thickness as the main body tube here. And so you have to sand down quite a bit of that. You can see there's a gap there. And when this is finished, we'll actually mount the fin so that the base of the root edge there is going to be flush with the aft end of the rocket. And that will leave a little tiny gap right about here. Okay, and that actually shows up in the rocket kit plan, so that's intentional there. And so the way to do this is, probably more than one way to do this. But what I've done is taken some 100 grit sandpaper, and first, let's try this one. Alright, so I've got the shoe plate against the insert there, and I give just a little bit of rubbing here, and for the most part we're not going to see anything right away on that because we've got about 2 millimeters of clearance between the two. So the whole idea here is to make this curved so it conforms to the rocket body better. And so if I put my sandpaper against the lower body tube, the inserted tube there, I can just pull it across, and this is going to take away the wood a little at a time, but also give it a curved shape. Now you need to make sure that the fin is completely upright when you do this. And for the initial steps, you may find it easier just to go ahead and come up here and drag this across. That way you've got a full surface underneath the sandpaper, and then we'll fine-tune the curvature here as we get down. Because what we need to do is actually sand off most of the thickness of that shoe plate. Now here you may be able to see it's not entirely even. I'm getting more sanding here than I am here, and that's because of the way I'm holding it. So I can reverse direction here and just put a little more pressure now on the back side of the fin. Okay, and so as I go along here, I'm just going to keep comparing this. Alright, so we've got less of a gap there now, but still not completely gone. And then when I finally get to the point where this part of the fin is actually touching here, then I can go back to sanding that forward part of the fin just enough to give it a curvature here as well. Okay, so this isn't as wide as that base shoe is, so this is not going to take very long to do. Okay, here's one I did earlier, and it's pretty much in its finished state here. So if I put it up against the body tube and slide it back to where it's supposed to be, okay, you can see that there's a little gap there between the base of the shoe plate and the main body tube. And as I said, according to the plans and the instructions, that's supposed to be there. I may actually need to sand that just a little bit farther down. There is a little bit of a gap there on the forward part of the fin. That is going, if I sand that down just a little bit more, that'll make for a stronger joint. So I'm going to finish sanding these, and when we're done, we'll come back to put on the fins and actually glue them to the body tube. My base shoes are all sanded on the fins here. And then coming back to the instructions, they actually say to wait now before gluing those on. This is a point where if you want, you could paint the fins individually. The recommended color scheme has two red fins and one white fin. So you could paint the fins now if you wanted to and then attach them. If you want to do that, you want to make sure that if you get any paint on any of this part of the fin, the root edge and the shoe plate here, that you'll need to sand that paint off. Okay, you could also paint the lower body tube at this time, and the same precaution there in that you'll need to either mask off where the fins are going on, or you're going to need to sand those again. I'm going to wait and do all my painting at the same time. So our next step is to put the motor mount in. And so I'm just going to dry fit this first. And that's a little bit snug right there. But I think if I just take my thumbnail here and chamfer the inside edges, it'll probably be fine. Otherwise, let's need to take a little bit of sanding paper to the centering rings there. But I think what happens is just yeah, that's better there. Just get a little lip of the edge there that gets folded in. Okay, and so what we're going to do on this one to help ensure that we get lots of glue in everything is we'll go ahead and put some glue. They recommend about 3.5 inches up inside the tube first. Get that first ring in there, and then we'll put another bead of glue just on the inside edge here. And what will happen is then that forward centering ring will hit the band of glue here, the aft centering ring will hit the band of glue down here, and we're not trying to push the entire thing through one big wide blob of glue there. So here I've got a long cotton applicator, and I'm going to use it to get up inside the tube. And I'm going to measure 3.5 inches here and put my thumbnail there. So now when I've got glue on the swab, when I put this in, I can use my thumbnail as a guide for how deep it's going in there. I'm using wood glue. Again, white glue could be done as well. Alright, so I'm going to go in and then just smear that around. Take a look inside. Looks like I need a little bit more. And by a little, I mean another big blob. Okay, so we can see the glue in there, and it's more or less uniform. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and slide in the motor mount to there. And now I'm going to take a little more glue. You've got to be a little bit more careful about it here. But only a little. Turn the tube a bit here, and I'm getting a little bit of glue on the motor mount itself, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm just going to push this in. I feel it hit the first band of glue there. We want to do this fairly quickly. Okay, and then we want to push this in until the motor mount tube is flush with that body tube. Alright, so I'm going to let this dry. Once the glue has set, I will also put a fillet of glue on this side of the engine ring here, just to give it some additional strength and also to seal it up there. While the motor mount is drying, we can then put on the launch lugs, and we assembled these at the same time that we did the fin, so these have dried overnight. Got a little bit of glue there. Okay, so if you got some glue where it should not be, just kind of scrape that off. And now what we're going to do is find our launch lug line here that was going very far up. And the first launch lug will be right here at the base of the main body tube. The second launch lug indicated here is going to be 10 inches up. Okay, so that's going to be pretty close to the end of the body tube, so there's 6 inches. I'm actually going to need to extend my line here. Alright, but 10 inches will be about here. So yes, I need to extend my line up a little bit. I'm going to do that quick, and then we'll come back to this. So now I've extended my line, and I made a mark up here at 10 inches, or about 28.5 centimeters for the metrically inclined. And now I'm going to do is just take my launch lug assembly here, and I'll put a coating of glue on there. I don't want this to be too sloppy, and we're going to make fillets on it later. we do want enough here to make a good bond. Okay, and what I'm going to do is, instead of just putting it on there and leaving it, make sure I'm on the right line here, there we go. I'm going to put it on, get it straight there first, and now I'm going to pop this back off again. I'm just going to let that glue get tacky for about 30 to 60 seconds, and then I'll put it back on. And then we'll do the same thing up here with the forward launch lug. And I use the same technique when I'm putting fins on as well. And I've just found over the years that it works really well to give your fins a little more adhesion and keep them from sliding off. Used to be a lot of the rocket kit manufacturers actually included that in their instructions. I don't see it as much anymore. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and put this back on. Okay, make sure that we're in line. And now I'm just going to apply some gentle pressure here. So that might have moved just a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing up front. View this kind of like a gun sight and make sure that the lower and the upper launch lugs here are in line, and they appear to be. Okay. If you have a 3/16 inch launch rod handy, it could be happy too. But if you got one handy, you can also just slide that through here and use it to make sure that everything is aligned. Alright, the launch lugs have set, and we'll go ahead and put some fillets on those later. So now we're to the fins themselves, and according to the instructions, they suggest to actually sand a little bit here where the fins are going to go in order to break up the glassine part here, the glossy part of the cardboard, and give a little bit better bond. I've done it both ways, and some people swear that this increases the holding capacity of the glue. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm just going to take a little medium sandpaper here. I'm not going to sand the entire area because I do still need to see my lines here. Okay, and I'm going to glue these in the same way that I did the launch lugs. So I'm going to go ahead and just take a little bead of glue here. Now remember, there's going to be a little gap right there. So if the base is flush with the end of the tube, there's going to be that little gap right there. And we want to keep that there. It's actually part of the model. So, I guess if you do fill it in, it's not the end of the world. Okay, and just like I did the launch lugs, I'm going to press this on and then remove it again to allow it to become tacky. Okay, you can actually see where I got that a little bit off. I'm just going to kind of scoot the glue over a little bit there. Okay, and I'll wait just 30 seconds or so and let this tack up. Wood glue actually sets up pretty quickly, and so I like it for fins because of that. Okay, and once I've got this on, it's a good idea to wait 20-30 minutes at least to make sure that it's got some good adhesion before going on to the next one. Alright, so I'm going to try to keep that all as straight as possible. Alright, and I'm bringing this back flush with the tube. Straight along my line, and I can actually use that gap to see just a little bit of the line underneath the fin. Okay, got a little bit of glue coming out there. I'm just going to gently clean that off, and eventually that'll form into a fillet as well. Okay, so there's the first fin. I'm going to let that dry a bit and then do the other three, and we'll come back when I'm done. So the glue is dried on our fins and on the launch lugs. And the next step here will be to apply fillets. We do want to be a little bit careful that our fillets don't cover up the detail bits here on the fins, but at the same time we don't want the fins coming off. Over here on our launch lugs, some good fillets here will help smooth out the differences between the launch lug, the standoff, and the body tube here. So I'm just going to kind of fill this in. You might also want to use some wood filler on those. Okay, again, something like this plastic wood or the Elmer's variety of the same thing. It works really well for filling in gaps like this, but it's not very strong. So I would recommend first putting in a glue fillet, and then if you want additional filler in there, use the plastic wood or other wood filler. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the launch lug up here. Alright, now for the fillets on here, because of all the detail work here, I'm going to use white glue on that instead of the wood glue, since the white glue will give me a little bit more workability time. And it's also easier to apply it in the tight spaces there. You can actually see here now, just from my handling of the rocket, that the glue on this fillet is going to move toward the aft end. Alright, up here, let's see if I can get this in focus. Alright, you notice there's some gaps here with the little shoe plate on that one. Same thing here, and this is just because after we sanded these, they became very, very thin. And they can also react to the water and the glue that we're using. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll fillet these things as well, and that will fill in any little gaps that we've got here. Alright, so I'm going to continue doing this off camera, as it's at this point probably getting a bit boring. So I'm going to finish off the fillets here, and that will be pretty much the extent of the construction, and finishing will be the final touches here. The fillets are mostly dry now. They're not completely cured, but they're dry enough that they aren't going to move on us. And now the next thing to do is finish the assembly here of the main lower body tube, and this will simply consist of gluing this piece in like that. Okay. And again, this is the lower part of the baffle here that extends up through the upper tube. And like we showed earlier, I actually messed up on this, and so this Kevlar cord was my answer to fixing my error. Now, if this weren't a scale model, I would actually consider not making this a permanent joint and instead using some reusable plastic rivets here to attach this instead. And the reason I say that is so that you could actually have access to the shock cord here as well as to the baffle itself. Sometimes the baffles can get clogged with soot and remnants of propellant and things like that, and if you have access to it like this, it's easier to shake them out. And of course, one thing that most model rockets have the problem with is once you got your shock cord anchored inside, it's really hard to change it. Now hopefully with the Kevlar here, it's going to probably last longer than the rocket anyway. But when I can, I like to be able to access different parts for repair or even upgrades and things like that. But since this is a scale model and I don't want rivets sticking out of it, I'm going to go ahead and glue this in. Alright, I'm just going to run a bead of wood glue around the inside here. So we've got a bunch of glue there, and we do want this to be in very securely because the baffles will create a little bit more back pressure than would be there if we didn't have the baffle, and so we don't want this just blowing out of the rocket without deploying the recovery system. Okay, so now I'm just going to slide this in and give it a little turn. I'm going to go ahead and try and match up the spirals here. It actually doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Okay, but these are tight tubes, so you want to don't stop your motion at any point here, or the glue may lock up on you and you're stuck with whatever it's at. Okay, so that should be glue on there nice and firmly. And that's about it as far as the construction is concerned. We just need to attach the parachute, a little bit of excess glue stuck there, attach the parachute to it, and I'm going to go ahead and talk very briefly about that in just a moment. Here's our parachute. It's not very fancy, it's just a basic plastic parachute here. And like most model rocket kits, the instructions call for simply tying this onto the nose cone, or in this case to the coupler. So in this rocket, we're going to attach it here to the reducing coupler, and what they do is simply pass this through, and then you open up this loop and pass the entire parachute through it, like that. Okay, and then it comes out into a nice knot. For those of you who've seen these videos that I make before, you'll recall that I don't like to do that. Instead, I'm going to put a snap swivel on here, and so I'm going to start by coming back here and making sure my shroud lines are all approximately the same length. Okay, so then gather that loop there around my finger and hold on to it. Now I don't want to change the proportion of the shroud lines. And then I'm going to take a snap swivel here that you would get from the fishing section of a sporting goods store. Place that through, and then I'm just going to put the entire snap swivel through the loop and then cinch it down. Now this can be attached to the eyelet on the adapter here. Okay, and this is the part that actually will determine how big your snap swivel needs to be. Because the size of this eyelet here is going to determine how big the snap part is going to have to be. The rest of the snap swivel itself is more than strong enough to support the rocket. And so I could have a smaller snap swivel on here and have no problem at all with the strength of it, but the smaller snap swivels have smaller snaps. And in this particular case, this has got a pretty heavy eyelet on there, and it's going to require a bigger snap part of the snap swivel. These are not very expensive. You can get a pack of 10 to 20 depending on the size for about $2 at most stores. And so I just keep a package or two of this in my construction box and in my launch box, and this allows me to do a couple of things. One is I can store my rocket without the parachute. So I don't have to have that parachute all wadded up inside the rocket all the time. And it also means that I can swap out parachutes, so that, for example, if maybe my baffle didn't work quite as well as advertised, and I might have damaged the chute, maybe melted it a little bit, I can really easily just snap this out, put another chute back on it. I may decide that I need a bigger chute or a smaller chute, or maybe I want to change from a plastic chute to a nylon one. By having the snap swivels on all my parachutes, it just makes it easy for me to change out parachutes between rockets, or even multiple parachutes with a single rocket. As I mentioned earlier, I decided not to glue my nose cone in so that I've got access to this part of the tube. And the reason for that is this allows me to put in a small payload here, like an altimeter. And then one of these kind of self-contained dongle altimeters will fit just inside here, so this can easily fit inside. So any of these Jolly Logic ones will fit. The Estes altimeter will fit as well. And all I've done here is put a little bit of a Kevlar line onto another snap swivel. And then that can attach here. Now you can do this further down. You could put this on the adapter here if we wanted to, but then you've got more stuff all crammed in there with the parachute and the shock cord and everything. Whereas this keeps it separate, keeps it cleaner, hopefully less damaged. And then all I have to do is just lower this inside and maybe increase the friction here a little bit with some masking tape. The other thing we will need if we're going to run an altimeter in this is to drill a small hole in the side so that there's communication of air pressure between the inside and outside of the rocket. Okay? So I hope you had as much fun building this as I did, even with the accidents and foibles and such, and have a good flight.